Hello, this is End Times Trending for December 29th, 2016. I'm Tony Samario, coming from my father BroSal.org YouTube channel. And I had one of the people who follows our commentary was asking about our position on the Hashemite king being this final ruler that we're waiting for, spoken of primarily in Daniel, and I think also in Revelation. And how do we arrive at that? What's the basis of that thinking? And as I was going back through Daniel 7, 8, and 9, because that's where all of this information is, I realized with all my highlights and notes in there that I've covered this recently, and so I tried to find the video on YouTube, and I can't find, it's not labeled as such, so I'm not sure if it was while we were teaching Revelation. It might be in the Bible study on Revelation, so it makes me realize that it is difficult to keep track of the individual teachings unless they're labeled as such. So I decided let's go ahead and look at this position again for the benefit of the person who is asking, and also for anyone else who might hear me reference that a lot. My father's been teaching that insight for nearly 30 years. It seems to really be the origin of this ministry, was realizing that while the rest of Christianity was waiting for the Pope or the President or the King of Spain or the Queen of England or some such thing to produce the Antichrist, through the study of the prophecies of Daniel primarily in the eschatology, it became clear to my father, at least many, many years ago, that this had to be the Hashemite king of Jordan if this was all going to happen in our time. And so the way that we arrived at that is quite simply through looking at the territory that this little horn that's prophesied in Daniel chapter 7, where he sees the four beasts. And in the 7th verse, he says, after these things, after he'd seen the other three beasts, I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and mighty and exceedingly strong, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up from before it. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth, speaking great things. So this is where we get the introduction to this little horn character, and we see that it comes out of this fourth beast, which we know in history, that's the Roman Empire that followed the Grecian Empire, the leopard from this vision. But we get additional information in the next vision that he has, which is I think a couple of years later according to Daniel. He has another vision in which a ram and a he-goat appear, and the he-goat runs into the ram and kills it, and the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. I mean, this is what most all eschatology interpretation has determined. There's very, very little wiggle room there. If the ram doesn't represent Persia and the he-goat Grecia, then we're a long way from understanding what any of these prophecies actually mean or have any relation to history. So this is all stuff pretty much even the most brain dead of Christianity accept this. So when you get to this next chapter of Daniel, I'm sorry, let's go back real quick to chapter 7 where the angel now interprets this vision. Daniel's just seen these four beasts. The fourth one comes up, and he's different from the other ones, and he's got 10 horns. And as he's considering these horns on the beast, another little one comes up, before which 3 are plucked up. And this little horn, apparently unlike the other ones, has eyes like the eyes of a man. This horn has eyes and a mouth, speaking great things. So that's the way he sees it. Now the angel points out to him, when he says, I wanted to know the truth concerning the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful. And concerning the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up between them, and before which 3 fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose appearance was greater than its fellows. So these are all our characteristics now when we're searching for, who are we talking about? So now the angel's going to interpret and tell him the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be greater than all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Which is, as I've tried to point out to people, means that that kingdom never did end. It devoured the whole earth and broke it in pieces. It started the Muslim empire over here. It started the, what became England and the aristocracy of Europe that owned Europe. That, all of this growth out of that kingdom that became the Roman Catholic Church that then went and devoured the whole earth, right? So the Roman Catholic Church is certainly a part of this 4th beast. But I don't think it's the beast of Revelation. I don't think the Catholic Church is the Antichrist. It's part of this historical 4th beast that takes over the whole world. Because there is no other in this prophecy. Daniel sees only 4. And we know the world didn't stop 2,000 years ago at the end of the Roman Empire. And as for the 10 horns, and that's why I believe I've related this to how the world was broken into these secret societies that rule from behind the scenes. That's why it's a different beast from all the others. The others ruled through the power of military might and the cohesion, right, of a collected base of humanity, a civilian base. These people rule through deception and through illusion, through pulling strings from behind the scenes, through secret societies that nobody knows about, don't know what they're doing and when they're doing it. We're just controlled. We're devoured, the earth. So that's the way I see that playing out if these prophecies are real. If they're not, well, then they're wrong. They're just made up. Their history doesn't fit. But if they're real, then history must fit. And as for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, they are 10 kings that shall arise, and another king shall arise after them. And he shall be greater than the first, and he shall defeat 3 kings. And he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall plot against the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time, which has been determined to mean 3.5 years, a time, times, and half a time, if that's correct. It fits the rest of the eschatology with the 42 months being mentioned a couple of times. So in chapter 7, you get this vision of this rulership of the world, which has already been interpreted fairly simply to be that the 4 beasts, the lion being Babylon, and the bear being Medo-Persia, and the leopard being Grecia, and then this indescribable different 4th beast being the Roman Empire, which is why manipulated and brain-dead Christian eschatology looks for this reconstituted these 10 kings out of the Roman Empire. But wait a minute, where is this all taking place, right? So when you come to chapter 8 now, he talks about this he-goat and this ram. I don't want to have to go through all this because this isn't really the Bible study. We've covered this in the Bible study. I want to lay the biblical groundwork for why we imagine in the geopolitical scene the Hashemite king fits the role of this little horn being prophesied by Daniel, and that's the only possible solution if these are the days, and if this prophecy is real and not just fantasy. And so in chapter 8, the he-goat, it says at the 8th verse, became exceedingly great, and when he was strong, his great horn was broken. And there came up 4 prominent ones under it towards the 4 winds of heaven, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south and toward the east. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. And it magnified itself even to the prince of the hosts, and it took away from him the continual sacrifice, and demolished the place of his sanctuary. And a host was given to him against the continual sacrifice by reason of transgression. And the holy thing was cast down to the ground, and the horn went ahead and prospered. So, more of this action that's got to take place from this little horn. This is the one that comes up, and 3 are uprooted in it to make room for it, according to the previous prophecy. And now we're finding out that where it comes from is out of one of the 4 that replace Alexander the Great. Okay? Without having to belabor the Daniel prophecy, it's been determined that it's this Seleucus portion of the kingdom, which is the Middle East, where we're fighting right now, Syria, Iraq, Palestine. This was the part that General Seleucus won and took over after Alexander the Great's death. So it's from one of these territories that this little horn emerges in the latter day. Okay, because now at the 23rd verse of the 8th chapter of Daniel, you get again this angel's interpretation that tells them, and at the latter end of their kingdom. This is these horns, right? The 22nd verse. Let's start with the 21st verse. And the he-goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexander the Great. And as for the horn that was broken, and there arose 4 others under it, 4 kings shall rise up out of the nation, but not by their own power. Right, so they're going to be supported by these different territories. And at the latter end of their kingdom, right, the latter end of their kingdom, which means if we're going to project this to today, it hasn't ended yet, or all this prophecy is either meaningless because it already happened, or it's meaningless because it's fictional. But if it's meaningful, then the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressions are come to an end, a king of fierce countenance who understands riddles shall arise, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall cause terrible destruction, and shall prosper, and cross over, and destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his craft and treachery, his dominion shall prosper, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and suddenly he shall destroy many. And he shall also rise up against the prince of princes, but he shall be defeated easily. Excuse me. So in this chapter we've had prince mentioned twice, that this little horn would magnify himself even to the prince of the hosts, right? Like King of Kings, it's the way I read it, prince of the hosts. And then here it says that he'll also rise up against the prince of princes, but he shall be defeated easily. Okay, so this is more of what's got to happen now. Now think of who the prince of princes is, crossing over to destroy the mighty and holy people. That would be God's people, right? The ones the promise had been made to, even though they're whores, even though God's rejected them, even though the current state of Israel is not God bringing his people back, but the synagogue of Satan attempting their own coup d'etat on God's word and God's holy mountain. He still promised the prophets that he'd replace Israel with a remnant, and after all this destruction, he himself would cause the grass to grow in this desolated land, desolated by war, with no grass growing anywhere. He will cause it to grow. He will cause them to multiply. If we're going to think about things like Ezekiel, he may even call the bones out of the ground and put flesh back on them and send them back into Israel to repopulate it. So, which tells us Israel's going to be devastated. Everybody's going to be killed except a remnant. So this is where this is all pointing to. It got nothing to do with Europe. So I don't know how you tie Europeans into this, especially when we're told it's from the area of this fourth horn, one of these four that took over for Alexander the Great. Out of one of them come forth a little horn, and at the latter end of their kingdom, a king of fierce continence shall arise. A king. How many kings we got in the world? Where do they live? Right? So, okay. Now if we go to chapter 9, we get one last piece of the puzzle from Daniel that's important, and that's this 70 weeks of years prophecy, which is this timetable. And again, if you want to know all about that, I believe you should start with our Revelation teaching. Maybe that's where we went into Daniel, but stick with the Bible study. We've covered this stuff. After you've listened to all the Bible study recordings, then ask me to go over this stuff again. So at the 26th verse of the 9th chapter, it says, after 62 times 7, Messiah will be slain. Right? This is after the 62 weeks, after the 7 weeks, which is 69. That brings us all the way up to the time Messiah is slain in some 30 AD, 33 AD, whatever that happens to be. And the city shall be without a ruler, Jerusalem, and the holy city shall be destroyed, together with the coming king. Now, again, we could argue that was done in 70 AD. The holy city was destroyed. I don't know who the coming king is in that scenario, since we're talking about Messiah the Prince here, you'll see. So, who's the coming king of Jerusalem that Daniel's speaking of, if that happened in 70 AD? I believe this is the projection to this final establishment of Jerusalem and temple and the coming king that they're going to call Messiah. And the holy city shall be destroyed together with the coming king, and the end thereof shall be a mass exile, and at the end of the war desolations are determined. Again, this has all happened. It really happened that way. So it could, many argue that it's history, and it's probably the only legitimate argument in Christianity, since at least it shows a little bit of attention to detail. It looks like this has happened already. But if we're going to talk about this shadow and fulfillment that Paul seems to see in Scripture, that the Old Testament prophecies were a shadow of things to come. So this shadow that's cast into the future of the Messiah returning, because that's what we wind up in the New Testament. Daniel didn't see the Messiah. He didn't get to reckon that into his visions. So for him, there's a Messiah that's slain and a coming king that will be destroyed with the city. And at the end, a mass exile. Okay, now we can tie this into Revelation for our eschatological viewpoint, because we have this idea that they're going to flee and a way is going to be made for them, right? A river is going to open up to swallow this army that's after them, God's people, and a way is going to be made for them to escape, and they're going to go to a place prepared for them. And that's where he'll save a remnant, is what all the prophecy throughout the Scripture talks about. So what we're expecting is a lot of death, a destroyed city. The prophecies say he brings them back to a completely desolated Jerusalem. So again, I want to project this, if this is the future, together with the coming king, and the end thereof shall be a mass exile. They're going to be running, right? Exiled. You're out of here. Okay, who's going to throw them out of there? Who wants them out of there? What's the big talk right now? The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the rebuilding of the temple, isn't it? Whose hill that is? Don't the Zionists want all of it? From the Nile to the River Euphrates? Aren't we accusing the Zionists right now of causing all these wars? I mean, that's the left-wing liberal anti-Zionism narrative in the alternative media, the mainstream alternative media, is that Zionism wants all that land and they're oppressing these people and they're going to kill they're going to destroy all these kingdoms to get all that land. And that certainly appears to be what's going on. That doesn't take into account this Albert Pike prediction that it's all setting everybody up to be destroyed, and it doesn't take into account the biblical prediction that it'll end with a mass exile and only a remnant being saved. So whatever they're trying to do, apparently they don't do it. Something happens. And here's what appears to happen here at the 27th verse, the last verse of what we call Daniel chapter 9. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 7 weeks, and half a 7 weeks. Then he shall cause the sacrifice and gift offerings to cease, and upon the horns of the altar the abomination of desolation. And the desolation shall continue until the end of the appointed time. The city shall remain desolate. So it's not in desolation now, so it didn't remain desolate. So I say we're not there, and we haven't seen this 7-year covenant. Now the he here is what Scott used to talk about. What could this be referring to except this coming king, right? Because the 26th verse says, and the city shall be without a ruler, and the holy city shall be destroyed together with the coming king. And the end thereof shall be a mass exile, and at the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 7 weeks. Who's the he? Unless it's just starting a new idea, the he is the one that does the confirming. Got nothing to do with the coming king. You'll know when you see a covenant confirmed. That's he. I don't know. It could go either way. It seems he's talking about the coming king that confirms the covenant, but I don't say it demands it. He confirms a covenant with many. Somebody. You'll know when the covenant's confirmed because of what he says about it. In the middle of it, he causes the sacrifice and gift offerings to cease, and upon the horns of the altar, the abomination of desolation. Well, there's no altar. So that presupposes rebuilding an altar. Okay, so I'm trying to get back to why the Hashemite king now. So when you look at where this has all taken place as far as Daniel's concerned and what it's about, the holy people, Jerusalem, the prince, the destruction of the city, the desolation that comes at the horns of the altar after a 7-year covenant is made and broken. Who's in a position to make all that a reality? When you look at, now come into the modern day, what are they trying to do? They're not at war with the Romans anymore. Now they're at war with Islam and the Muslims, which may just be a function of that old Roman Empire. Maybe one of those horns that come out of that Roman Empire. One of those heads on the 7-headed beast of this Revelation, right? Because Revelation now is going to tell us that they set up on the wing of a temple an abomination that causes desolation. And this false prophet character causes this monument or whatever they set up to speak. Calls fire down from heaven, according to Revelation. So somebody's going to work miracles over there to convince people. And Jesus tells them, when they ask him what's going to happen, he says wars and rumors of wars. And he says, but you're going to be, but don't be alarmed at the wars and rumors of wars, because the end is not yet. Then you'll be handed over to be persecuted for my name's sake. That's the real clue. And he says, see, I've told you ahead of time, which sounds a little, sort of important, because he also adds that this deception that's coming would fool the very elect if that were possible. Think of who the very elect is that he's talking to. These are the people that have seen his miracles, that believe in him, that know he's the Christ. So again, what is the issue? This Messiah, right? That John says anyone who denies Jesus is the Messiah is the Antichrist. That is the Antichrist, because Christians have it mixed up the way I learned it. Antichrist isn't against Jesus. It's not this character that's just evil and against Jesus. No. It's more like a character that looks so much like Jesus that it stands in for Jesus. It's the false Messiah, the not Messiah. Because the issue is, who's the Messiah? Who's really the rightful ruler of that temple? Who's the prince? You see, who's the king? And so the Christians say, through Paul, the Jew that got the word, Jesus is the Messiah. And right up until a few years ago, one of these old rabbis had a vision and wrote down, Jesus is the Messiah. So this is what the world's coming to over there. And Jesus told the Jews they're going to be persecuted for his name, which is really odd, since they don't believe in Jesus. So something's got to happen to change that. And the deception that's going to go down is going to be so thorough that even the very elect would be fooled if that were possible, right? Even the disciples that were with him, that knew him personally, could be fooled by the coming deception if that were possible. If they weren't so sure, no, I'm waiting for Jesus. I know who I'm waiting for, and this ain't it. Just like the Jews thought during Jesus' time. We know what we're waiting for. We're waiting for a Messiah like King David. And you ain't it, buddy. You might be healing people, but we don't know what devil you're healing them through, but you ain't the Messiah. So same thing's going to happen again now. So who's in position to pull this off? Daniel also says somewhere in here, it's through peace that he'll destroy many, this final king. Paul says it's when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them. So how's all this peace and safety going to come out of this world of terrorism? Who's possibly going to rise up in the place of this righteous warrior that's given a crown of honor as this first seal of Revelation? Right? Donald Trump is a righteous warrior given a crown of honor. The Pope is a righteous warrior that's going to go out conquering and to conquer. Are you kidding me? Who could this be? So, I say the whole ISIS was set up as the black caliphate to make way for the white caliphate. That what they've wanted is to be able to control all that land in this name of Zionism, because their ultimate goal is that they're going to rule that land. Not for God, but that's the story. We're God's people. We're going to rule that land in the name of God, in the name of Judaism. From our temple, our Messiah is going to come, and we're going to rule the world. So this is their trajectory. This is their narrative. And to do that, of course, they got to get rid of all these Muslim kingdoms. And geez, since the 50s, since right after the state of Israel was established, you've had nothing but CIA involvement in all these countries like Iran, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, all this stuff to create the Middle East that we have today, or that we've always had up until today, where they've recreated it after 9/11. That's why I say these transitions. 9/11 brought us the ability to now break down all those regimes that we built up to keep the people divided over there, right? Because that was the whole idea. 100 years ago, the Hashemite king wanted to unite all his people. And so he said, well, okay, England, you want me to help you defeat the Ottomans? When that's done, I want your help to unite all my people into the caliphate that we're expecting from our scripture. So that's one indication of the Hashemite king's position. And now it just so happens that you get this Sunni Hashemite that rises up claiming to be the king, and he's this Baghdadi that starts this CIA-funded mercenary army that not even any of their own people want to join, that I've been talking about as a false flag set up from the beginning, specifically to put this pressure on Israel so that what? they're going to say peace and safety. Who's going to bring them peace and safety? What do they all want to do? They want to rebuild that temple, right? They want that land. They want to rule over those Muslims. How'd they do it last time? They went and got the Hashemite king and said, you help us defeat the Ottomans and we'll support you. So isn't that what they're doing again today? We're going to give you the guns, Jordan. You're going to help us defeat these guys because you're the good king. You've been saying it since your father. Your father was the first one to make peace with Israel. Your father was the one that was, the Jews called him Prince of Peace at one point because of his determination to be friends with Israel and to share and all that kind of thing. So it's the Hashemite king that in the 90s, the UN gave him the special consideration when it came to final status talks in Jerusalem, when they decide actually how they're going to divide it between Islam and Judaism. He's the guy that's going to speak for Islam and have to be considered for the final status talks. So that we've always seen, that sets him up to make this 7-year covenant. To say, yeah, we're ready to share this mount. It also sets him up to be this white caliphate, this Sunni caliph that's the good guy. He don't want to kill everybody for Islam. He's the guy for all his whole career that's been saying Islam's peaceful. That's not Islam. We're against those terrorists just like you. And these riddles and these great things he's going to be speaking, which I believe they've been hiding from Christianity all along, because what I've learned that I never heard from Christianity is that in the Quran, one of the prophecies from Muhammad, when his disciples asked him what's going to be the sign of the end, the coming of the Mahdi and the end of history, and he said there's 10 signs. 10 signs. And 2 of those 10, one is the return of Jesus. The return of Jesus. Who else in the world's waiting for the return of Jesus? Anyone? Why isn't that common knowledge in the Christian world? That Muhammad, I don't know, where'd they get this prophecy, you guys? Why are they waiting for the return of Jesus? And the Antichrist, Dajjal, the false Messiah, is what they call him. The false Messiah, the not Messiah, because Jesus, the true Messiah, is going to come back. And so the 2 of the indicators of the 10 of the end, one is the return of Jesus and the other is the appearance of Dajjal, the false Messiah. Isn't that interesting? That Christianity doesn't know that. So I say that this mouth speaking great things, this little horn, also Jordan's a very little kingdom when you compare it to the power of Syria and Iraq and all these other countries around them that are much more significant in history. This is an emerging kingdom that was just set up in the 50s. And so, or at least that territory was given to them in the 50s after their king was assassinated. And so when you look at, and on the Hashemite website, the current king expects England to make good with their promise and assist the Hashemites in collecting the Muslims under their umbrella of rule. So what I see coming is the white horse, the good warrior, that's going to fight the good fight on behalf of the world and Islam, who it can be shown when he starts pointing out, we're waiting for Jesus too, right? And the temple was never where Al-Aqsa Mosque stood anyway. It was in the city of David. And Islam, I don't know, is going to participate in this whole thing and become the good guy, and they're going to achieve peace and safety, which is why I say it can't be tomorrow, you guys. We're still at terror, fear, fear, fear. But anyway, so the reason the Hashemite king's in position is because he's a little horn. As he's coming now to be this person they're going to give all this land to, well, they've uprooted Iraq. They've uprooted Libya. And, it looks like they're going to uproot Assad. They've certainly uprooted his kingdom in the sense that he's never going to rule all that land anymore. But plucked up by the roots. I mean, they kind of did the same thing to Egypt. We always thought it was Syria, but I'm willing to look at the facts on the ground and say, maybe it's already happened. One of Daniel's prophets says he's going to subdue Egypt and the Libyans. Eventually, this king that takes over. And so is that why Egypt had to, be in such turmoil now? Because this white horse in Revelation goes forth conquering and to conquer. He's given a crown. He doesn't earn it in battle. Daniel says he rises to his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Well, how's that possible? Well, he's got NATO on his side. This little horn. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own, not because he's Jordan's king. Right? So that all makes sense. And he goes forth, according to Revelation, after he's given this crown, conquering and to conquer. Well, what's he got to conquer? All the resistant form of radical Islam that was created over the last 100 years to dethrone him and keep that area destabilized. He's got to go conquer all that bad element now with these weapons and power he's been given. And the world can see that we've got peace and safety because we got a good guy now who's telling us how much he loves Jesus too. He's waiting for the Messiah too. Let's rebuild that temple. So anyway, in the world today, the only one that comes from that territory that is a little horn, it looks as if 3 may have already been uprooted to make way for this caliphate of his. He's in a position to speak great things because he was given that right over 20 years ago by the UN when he was given the special consideration for final status talks. And the fact that through peace, he's going to destroy many. So really, the Hashemite king is the only one set up to become this, to fulfill, in my view, all of the things that Daniel outlines that this little horn must do if it's going to be in our time. And then, of course, he stands then in a position 3.5 years later to make his move, because he then would have unified the Muslims. He's got all the weapons of the West that are helping him. And now he takes some opportunity to say, you stop that sacrifice. We're going to worship me. Eventually, right, is what they say. He declares himself their God. Revelation says you get this false prophet calling fire down from heaven and making the image speak. Right? And because, Dave asks about the 2 witnesses, I want to mention that if you consider then all this setup coming, what's going to be standing against it? I say that right around Passover, you're going to have an earthquake like you did in Jesus' time. You're going to have graves open, as the Jews are waiting for, because they know their prophecy through their prophets says at that time the graves will open and people will come out of them. And they're going to go into Jerusalem and tell certain people that Jesus is the Messiah, and this temple that they're going to build is not the true Messiah, but the false Messiah that's coming. That gets the Jews that are going to be persecuted. Now, on the other side, you've got the Muslims that are waiting for Jesus. How do they know they're not being fooled by this false prophet? Who's going to tell them that, hey, this temple isn't the real thing. This isn't what we're waiting for. This isn't Jesus, remember. We're waiting. Muhammad told us we're waiting for a false Messiah and Jesus to return among the 10 signs. So this is the false Messiah. We're waiting for Jesus. I think that's what's going to be coming out of the 2 witnesses, who I think are going to have to be Muslims at this time. And that's why we're setting up this terrorism narrative from the West, from the Christian Zionist side. We're going to point to these people who are really God's prophets, and we're going to call them terrorists. And remember, they have the power, it says, to shut up the heavens so it doesn't rain, which is going to, what I think, be shown to be devastating, because there'll already be famines going on and the threat of famines. And so these guys are going to be bringing famine on people because they're shutting the heavens up. And it says they can bring down plagues as often as they want. And when I think plagues, I think Moses, right? Frogs or lice or, some stuff like that that's going to be happening. And only we'll know that that's because of them. I'm sure our press in the world will be calling them terrorists. And we're going to be trying to kill them because it says that the world will try to kill them, but no means will be successful. Until finally they're killed and their bodies will lay in the street for 3.5 days. And people will be so happy about it that they're going to send gifts to one another. So, look at our modern world. What could that mean? They've got peace and safety, but these terrorists are trying to stop it. We've pulled back from war. We're not going to war. And these guys are trying to cause the sort of, fake news. They're a fly in the ointment. And the world's they're trying to stop them and they can't. And when they finally do, it's such a big deal. We send gifts to one another. And that's why it would fool even the elect, if that were possible. Because the whole thing by our time is so framed in illusion that black will look like white and white will be made to look like black. And so Jesus said even the very elect would be fooled if that's possible. So, if you put it in the framework of all the evidence, there's only so many scenarios that could really answer for that unless you're expecting things to poof out of the sky. Like some of the Islam that follows their scripture literally. And, because Muhammad talked about a donkey with giant wings carrying people, they're waiting for a giant flying donkey instead of recognize that was his, what he envisioned as, or what he described as his vision of an airplane. What did he have reference to? Like a donkey with giant wings that could fly through the air. This mountain of gold underneath the Euphrates River. Some people interpret that. They're waiting for an actual mountain of gold to appear. Sheikh Imran Hussein presents the fact that when they went to the petrodollar system, that oil that's under the river became an endless mountain of gold that the world would fight over. That's what the prophet said. The world would fight over that gold. And 99 out of every 100 people would be killed that fought for that gold. So when you look at the way all the prophecies add up, it's really hard not to see the pattern to me. Stand back far enough. And so I'm sure the things my father's written in the past are probably a little more cohesive and coherent in explanation, but I've just been trying to consider all the views that I've been absorbing over the years to confirm in the scripture for myself that the Hashemite king of today is in position to be that little horn. He does have a look that's more stout than his fellows. Right? This is an English educated man with an English wife, an American wife that speaks English. He's, as I say, in a position through his whole heritage from his father to make peace with Israel. He's the guy who's got all the refugees. So he's in a position to speak some great things for Islam and say, let me show you the love. Let me show you what we're all about. And that's why they're going to give him a crown, I think, and the world's going to love him. And through peace, he's going to suddenly destroy many, is what it says. So anyway, I think he's the one in position. I hope that helps. I welcome the questions so we can keep diving into this stuff. But please go ahead and check out all the Bible studies. Start with Revelation, maybe. There's also the ones under miscellaneous focus studies that get into some of this end time stuff. That may be where I covered this part of Daniel. So anyway, thanks you guys for the support and for being here. I do appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Talk to you soon.